Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Vernon Mitchell. I am the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for the City of St. Louis, working for the Honorable Tashara O. Jones, the Mayor of the City of St. Louis. And I want to welcome you all here on behalf of the city. I'm glad to see you all out, but we're going to get started now. And this is Reparations Commission Public Meeting number 3. Before we get into that, I just want to take time to thank Reverend Burton and his amazing staff here at the North Side for working with us to make sure that we had this facility secured. His staff has been very attentive in working with us. Also want to thank Action St. Louis for their commitment to the city and to its people. This is really the work of true collaboration. And collaboration means that we all do our fair share, and that this has not been any different. And so I want to thank all of the stakeholders that have been involved. Each and every time we've had a meeting, there are still more meetings to come. Our next meeting will also be here. But again, I just want to thank those individuals. We have a pretty tight and filled agenda today, and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see all of you that are here. And so without further ado, I will bring the chair of the Reparations Commission, Kayla Reed.
Good afternoon. It's a small space, so we're going to feel free to come closer. We're going to be together for we predicted 2 hours, but I think it's going to be a little shorter than that. So just as an overview of the agenda, today we're going to review the mandate and the executive order once more. We're going to have just some introductory remarks from the commissioners that we have in person today. And then we're going to have a presentation from one of our commission members on wealth in St. Louis residents. We're going to take some questions from both the commission members and the public, and any public comments from any of you. And then we're going to review our meeting dates for July and August, and then we're going to get out of here. Sound good? And just as a follow-up to the first 2 meetings, we are still actively collecting all comments and questions. Our hope is that by the July and August meeting, we'll be rolling out some responses to those questions. So please feel free to continue in the public comment question to ask us questions and tell any stories and comments that you want the commission members to know. And then we're hoping in July at this event, at this location, that we'll be starting to provide some of the answers as we get ready to draft the report. So this summer, just as a reminder, is really about listening, learning together. So we have our first presentation today. As we enter the fall, we'll begin to start drafting the report that is a part of the executive order, and then we'll review the report in community to revise it, to prepare to submit to the mayor and the city in March of 2024. So if you have any questions or comments about that, there is a portion here for that. We're very excited to get started. With that, I'm going to pass it to Jada.
Hey guys, I am going to go over the executive order and the mandate. The Reparations Commission mandate should explore the history of race-based harms in the city, reveal the present-day manifestations of that history, and ultimately propose a method and potential funding resources for directly repairing the harms that have been inflicted. The Commission shall explore not just the social, economic, and political evidence, but also engage the moral, legal, and historical evidence for various claims to reparations and redistributive justice. Where centuries of American slavery, segregation, racism, racial capitalism, and injustice have reinforced a racial hierarchy that remains in place to this day, and whereas a growing tapestry in equity-based analysis, books, exhibitions, studies, reports, consent, decree, and more have shed light on the unique role that St. Louis has played in the development of racially exploitative practices and structures, and where these works document in detail a long history of racialized exclusion, extraction, and violence that has led to St. Louis becoming one of the most segregated and racially inequitable major cities in the nation. And where, in order to address these challenges, we must start by recognizing that extreme racial disparities are not natural nor inevitable, but are instead a function of public policy and political will. And whereas the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America defines reparations as a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments, corporations, institutions, and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Jada. So that segment is actually written inside of the executive order that was signed in December of 2022 by Mayor Jones. And it is the context in which we are having these discussions and these meetings toward learning together and identifying recommendations for the city to address that long history. So before we get started with our presentation, I'm just going to make space for the commission members to have opening remarks, and then we'll pass it to Ms. Gwen Moore, who will give us a presentation, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to move this mic around, so I hope it doesn't make any noise. Well, you're presenting, so did you want to give comments now? Did you want to give comments now if you're presenting?
My name is Gwen Moore. I'm a curator at the Missouri Historical Society, and I study local Black history. I want to say that I was not surprised by the type of information and knowledge and engagement that our audiences have had. It's really been a really deep learning experience. And I don't want to speak for the rest of the commissioners, but I think they would agree with me. And this has really been really a great experience to just listen to the public and see how deeply involved and committed they are to this whole process. So thank you.
I'm Reverend Kevin D. Anthony, and I serve as a supply pastor for the Missouri Mid-South Conference of the United Church of Christ. And to echo Dr. Brooks, looking forward to the work that has been taking place so far. I am just honored to serve you, and this has been quite an experience to see you come out and you show your interest as a community behind the work that we are doing. And I encourage you to keep our foot to the fire as we continue to move forward. These are some great people in the St. Louis community, and we've been working together. And of course, we honor our mayor for being forward-thinking and looking forward with this sort of work here in St. Louis. And so, again, I'm honored to serve you in this capacity.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Will Ross. I'm a professor of medicine at Washington University School of Medicine and Associate Dean for Diversity at Washington University School of Medicine. And I've been active in public health and reducing community health disparities for about 30 years in St. Louis. Over the past 3 months, we heard really a very candid comments about where this city is going and what we need to do to really repair the injustice. And it was really precise. We need to start dismantling systems of oppression in St. Louis and focusing more on creating wealth, looking at our banking systems here, improving housing and housing distribution, providing livable wage jobs, reducing the nefarious effects of the incarceral state. This came out loud and clear, and we heard that, and I'm pleased to say that that's consistent with all that we know from previous discussions about reparations in the country. And so we are on track and really taking all those comments and creating a report that will truly reflect the sentiment of St. Louis. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jada Brooks. I am a communications student at the illustrious Harris Stowe State University. I am a youth ministry leader, a youth advocate, and I just wanted to mention I had a conversation with a few people after the last public meeting, and they expressed that they don't feel like we were hearing their voices and that we are like really understanding the message that you guys are giving across. And I just wanted to affirm you as volunteers. We are volunteers, but we also have fallen victim to the same circumstances that you all have, and we are wanting justice, and we are going to get justice. And so I just want to affirm you that you guys' voices are being heard and that we hear you, and we're going to do everything that we can in our power to get that justice for you all. So, yeah, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Talk about blacks in St. Louis, I use the word accomplishment, achievement, resilience, but I also use the words of resistance and struggle, because there was a lot to resist in St. Louis and a lot to struggle against. And black people have always struggled against racial inequality and racial injustice. So what I'm going to talk about is the historic origins of the wealth gap. And that's just one aspect of the historic origins of the wealth gap, because there are many reasons why there's this gap between blacks and whites as far as race is concerned. So I'm going to start off by going back to enslavement. I'm basically a 20th century historian, but the roots of the inequality, of course, go back to slavery, because for generations, blacks were not able to get land because they were unpaid labor. There were blacks in St. Louis from the beginning of the city. The city was founded in 1764. The blacks were here then. We were almost 50% of the population back then. That decreased over the years. So Missouri was a slave state. St. Louis had enslaved people here. It wasn't a large population of enslaved. It was a rather small population, and a smaller population of free blacks. But this was an active center of the slave trade, and wealth was built on the trafficking of black bodies in this city. So that's where it starts. Now, I only have 20 minutes, so I'm going very quickly through this history. Like I said, early on, blacks made a large portion of the city of St. Louis, but that's because the city of St. Louis was very small. Let's say, well, like in 1772, for example, there were only, 399 white people and 198 black people. So that is about 50%. But that decreased over the years as immigration started coming into St. Louis, and we had more whites coming into the city. So the population started going down, down, down. So by the end of the Civil War, blacks only made up about 2 or 3% of the city of St. Louis. Now, when blacks were emancipated, we got nothing. Of course, we didn't have any money. We didn't have houses. We didn't have land, except for a few exceptions. These were atypical exceptions. But for the most part, blacks started off with zero, with nothing. We were not compensated. I want to say something about the Special Order number 15, which most of us knew about, the whole 40 acres and a mule. But that only applied to a very distinct population, the populations of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And it just so happened that in 1865, William Tecumseh Sherman and Secretary of War Edward Stanton met in Savannah, Georgia, and they called upon what they considered to be the black leaders, which were the ministers, and they called upon 20 black ministers, and they said, what do your people want, and what do your people need? Well, very wisely, they said land. We need land, because that's the basis of wealth. So William Tecumseh Sherman issued Special Order number 15, which allotted 40 acres of land along the Florida seacoast, the Georgia Sea Islands, South Carolina seacoast. Wasn't the mules at that time, just the 40 acres. There were about 18,000 emancipated African Americans. There were about 400,000 acres of land that had been confiscated from the Confederates, and they were given those 40-acre plots. And then later, they were given those Army mules. But that didn't last long. That was February, I think, when that order was issued. By the time Abraham Lincoln actually signed the order, but by the time Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson, who was a Confederate sympathizer, became president, and he revoked that order. So for one brief shining moment, we actually had reparations in this country, but only for a very select group of African Americans. In fact, the only people that really did get reparations were the former Confederates, the former slaveholders, because they were given $300 and more to compensate for the loss of their property. So when we talk about St. Louis, we didn't even get the promise of the 40 acres. We got nothing. We were left with nothing. Now, what's interesting about St. Louis, we're talking about 1860, 1865. By the end of the war, maybe 2 or 3% of the population. But right after the war, blacks started being segregated into black enclaves, and they did not have access to land. Land is the basis of wealth. Land is how you accrue wealth, and land is how you pass that wealth on down to generations. That's how you create generational wealth. So if you're denied and blocked from achieving land, you're denied and blocked from achieving wealth. Now, St. Louis has a really unique history, because even though we had a very small black population, whites were, how should I put it? They were intimidated by the black population. All through the 19th century, we never rose above 6 or 7% of the population, but we were still seen as a threat, and we were seen as a threat that had to be contained, that had to be restricted, and that is what happened. Blacks were contained and they were restricted. So let me fast forward to the 20th century, which I'm more familiar with, but 1904 was the World's Fair, and it brought more blacks into the city. And let me just say, before the Great Migration, blacks started leaving the South immediately after the Civil War, and one of the first places they were going to hit was St. Louis. Then again, after the end of Reconstruction, when those federal troops were withdrawn from the South and blacks were left without any protection, they again started moving north. So even before the Great Migration, blacks were starting to move north. And whites in St. Louis, and they use this term, invasion. And I always think that's interesting, because when we talk about immigration from the southern border, we call it, there's this invasion. Well, they use the same language when they were talking about blacks. They're saying blacks were invading the city. So this was a fear all through the 19th century that blacks were invading the city. Then in 1904, with the World's Fair, that attracted more blacks to the city of St. Louis. That's one of the reasons Annie Malone wound up in St. Louis, because of the World's Fair. She saw it as a business opportunity. But many blacks were starting to come to St. Louis because of the World's Fair, looking for opportunities. Black people were always looking for opportunities and a better way of life. About 1910, now we're talking about 1910, we're talking about maybe 6% of the population. We start seeing the beginnings of restrictive covenants. And restrictive covenants were when whites got together and they signed this pact that they would not sell or rent any property to black people. Okay? So black people probably couldn't invade these neighborhoods even if they wanted to. The population was not strong enough. And these restricted covenants grew over the years. They grew exponentially in the 1920s. That's when they really took off. By 1947, and this is right before the Shelley versus Kramer case, in 1947, there were about 378 restrictive covenants in the city of St. Louis. In fact, there were 2 Tuskegee scholars, Herman Long and Charles Johnson, that did a study of restrictive covenants, and St. Louis was one of the cities that they used to study this particular type of racial discrimination against black people. So you have these restrictive covenants that really are restricting blacks, not allowing them to live in places other than what's carved out for them by and I'll talk about this a little later, the real estate industry. But in 1916, well, right before 1916, 1916 was the residential segregation ordinance, but before 1916, there was a little pamphlet published by the Committee on Social Service Among Colored People that was sounding the alarm that whites were getting ready to pass a residential segregation law. And that residential segregation law actually went on the ballot in 1916. And the way this law read was that no black person legally, it would be against the law to move into a block that was 75% white. By the same token, no white person could move into a block that was 75% black. But of course, no white person wanted to move into a block that was 75% white. So again, this law did not actually, well, the law did pass. Overwhelmingly, it passed. It never went into effect. One of the reasons that the NAACP was very active, a local NAACP that was founded in 1914, this was their first big challenge, was this residential segregation ordinance. They got an injunction to prevent it from going into force. But even before it could even go into force and be implemented, a similar case from Kentucky, the same kind of case, residential segregation, legally enforced, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional, and so that wiped that out. That did not mean that there was no residential segregation in St. Louis just because there was no residential segregation law. Of course, residential segregation continued. Now, I always say if there are any villains in this case, and there are lots of blame to go around, plenty of villains, but to me, one of the major villains is the real estate industry. Let me tell you, first of all, the real estate industry was behind a lot of these restrictive covenants. They gave aid, comfort, money, organization. They helped these sort of what they call these neighborhood improvement associations to craft these residential segregation ordinances. Now, if that, I'm sorry, well, they were also the main instrument behind the residential segregation ordinance as well. So they were always active in pushing residential segregation. But in 1923, the Real Estate Exchange, which was the real estate body in the city of St. Louis, they met and they agreed that they would not sell or rent to black people out of certain specified what they call Negro districts. And they determined where these Negro districts would be. So they were determining where we would live and where we could not live. And 99 out of 100 agreed that they would go along with this and they would be censured if they didn't. In fact, in their code of ethics, you could lose your license if you did breach this agreement that you would sell to black people in a white neighborhood. So the real estate industry has really been a force to keep the city segregated. Okay, so that was 1923. Now, so we're talking about the city government tried to segregate black people with an ordinance that was struck down as unconstitutional. We had the real estate industry, a private body, actively involved in segregating black people, keeping them from denying them access to property, blocking their access to property, blocking their access to wealth. So then we have the federal government, 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he comes in with the New Deal. Some people say for black people it was a raw deal because they did not get the benefits that so many whites were given. We know about Social Security, a lot of black people were excluded from that. But we have this Homeowners Loan Corporation. And what the Homeowners Loan Corporation did, you all know about redlining, they color-coded every metropolitan area in the country. The safest areas were color-coded green. The riskiest areas were color-coded red. Anywhere that black people live was color-coded red. Even middle-class black neighborhoods were color-coded red. And why that is so significant is because the government was backing mortgages. And if you lived in a red area, a bank would not guarantee your mortgage. So then again, the federal government was blocking black people's access to property. So you have this redlining going on where you can't get property. So black people, didn't mean that black people couldn't buy property. A lot of times they had to buy on contract. In fact, I learned just recently that my parents had bought a house on contract. And what that means is that you have to go to a private seller. You can't get a bank loan. You have to go to a private seller. And you make installments. Well, that's risky when you're going to a private owner. You never own that house until you actually pay what the seller, the private seller says you have paid. And of course, that was rife with fraud, rife with exploitation. So again, it put black people at a disadvantage, not being able to get those bank loans. Now, one of the good things that came out of that was that we did get a banking industry, a black banking industry. Unfortunately, it didn't always last. We had New Age Federal, we had the People's Finance Corporation, we had Employees Loan and Finance. So we had to, in a way, create our own, as we always do. That's why I say blacks, the history of blacks is black accomplishments, black achievement, black resilience, that we have to make up for these historic wrongs that are done for us. But still, it put the masses of blacks at a tremendous disadvantage. So you have the federal government even complicit in keeping blacks from getting wealth, from getting land. Then we have, go to the 1944, which was the GI Bill. You had over 1 million black veterans coming back. Of course, the GI Bill is given a lot of credit for propelling so many people into the middle class, so many white people into the middle class, but black people could not take full advantage of the GI Bill. Number one, if you got a loan, you could not get a loan in a black neighborhood because it was redlined. You couldn't get a house in a green neighborhood because it was white, and they wouldn't let you come into that neighborhood. So blacks were, again, shortchanged by the very government that was supposed to be looking out for them. Blacks were paying taxes, just like everybody else, but they were not getting the benefits of their taxes. Okay. So then in 1949, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in, we see the National Housing Act, which provided the actual funds for slum clearance. A lot of black neighborhoods were destroyed by urban renewal. Mill Creek, of course, is the shining example here in St. Louis, one of the biggest black communities in the city of St. Louis, which was, like I always say, was wiped off the face of the earth beginning in 1959. Then we have the Highway Act, 1956. Just as so many black neighborhoods were destroyed by urban renewal because they were considered slums, because they were in these red areas, which were the risky areas, which were the unsafe areas, the Highway Act also destroyed a number of black neighborhoods. Again, I'll use the case of Mill Creek, but not just black neighborhoods, but other neighborhoods as well. Okay, so, oh, you can't, can you hear me fine? Okay, so I'm going to come to 1968, which is more recent, because we like to think of these things as being in the faraway past, but they're more recent than we think. 1968, we have the Jones versus Meyer case. Joseph Jones was an African-American man. His wife was Barbara Jones. She was white, and they wanted to buy a house in Paddock Woods. And an agent of Alfred Meyer, who was the developer at the time, said point blank, I'm not going to sell you a house because you're a Negro. And that was perfectly legal. That was perfectly legal to say, I'm not going to sell you a house because you are black. You didn't have to obfuscate. You didn't have to make up excuses. So they went to freedom of residence. Freedom of residence took their case, took it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that this kind of open racial discrimination was unconstitutional. Also in 1968, we have the Fair Housing Act, which Congress passed a law saying that this was illegal. So until 1968, it was perfectly legal to deny and to tell a black person that you cannot buy a house. Okay. Now, one more thing, 1973, and everybody knows about this. Now that really, Team 4. Team 4 was a private consulting firm that was brought in by the city of St. Louis. They wanted them to look over the 1947 city plan. And Team 4 recommended that you divide neighborhoods into 3 categories. There was conservation, redevelopment, and depletion. And I don't think I have to tell you which neighborhoods were called depletion. They were black neighborhoods. Now, the argument was Team 4 was never implemented. The Team 4 consultants themselves have said, you know, we never recommended withholding services from these depletion neighborhoods. We never recommended blighting these depletion. We never recommended any of the things that we've been accused of. But I think you can look at North St. Louis now, and whether it was formally implemented or not, we can see what North St. Louis looks like. I happen to live in North St. Louis, so I know firsthand what it looks like. So if we look at today, home ownership, 44.1% of blacks own their own homes. This is 1920 figures, so that's not so long ago, compared with 74.5% of whites who own their own homes. We all know that the basic way to achieve wealth in this country is through home ownership. For the average person to achieve wealth is through home ownership. If you do not have access to buying a home, it's difficult for you to accrue wealth. Furthermore, you cannot pass that down. Just, I don't have the exact figures here, but I don't know if I mentioned the Homestead Act, because in 1862, there was the Homestead Act. I mentioned the Special Order number 15 with the 40 acres, which did not apply to all black people, just a select few. But the Homestead Act, passed in 1862, basically gave land, 160 acres of land in the West, to anybody that would go on that land and live on it for 5 years and improve it. You had to all you had to do was pay a small fee, registration fee. But it was passed in 1862. 1862, most African Americans were enslaved. So they couldn't take advantage of the Homestead Act. Once they were no longer enslaved, you still had to pay that fee. And if you are left with nothing after working your whole life, your parents, your grandparents, working their whole life and have nothing, you can't pay that fee. So black people, for the most part, were not able to take advantage of the Homestead Act. There was a study done, I think it was in I'm not sure, don't quote me. I'll say 2020, but don't quote me on that. And it surveyed how many whites had benefited from that initial 1862 Homestead Act. And I think it came to something like 46 million. So if you can imagine, let's just imagine if blacks had been able to take advantage of the Homestead Act. Imagine if they did, not only if they had let that Special Order number 15 stay in place and expanded so that every black person got 40 acres, every black person got land, we would not be seeing the kind of figures that we see today. So with that, I think my 20 minutes are up. Is that true, Reverend Anthony? Okay. I asked Reverend Anthony to keep me honest. So, okay. So if anybody have any comments, questions?
Yeah, we'll start with comments from any of the questions from any of the commissioners. You have a question? We only have one mic, so we're going to try to project.
Right.
Keep us honest if you can't hear it.
Yeah, can you say more about St. Louis City government and its connection to disparity with black people, African American people here in St. Louis, and how they impacted wealth here?
Well, first of all, St. Louis was a segregated city. St. Louis was Jim Crow. It was just as segregated as any city in Mississippi or Georgia or Alabama. The only difference was that we did not have those laws on the books. We had only 2 racially restricted laws on the books. One, of course, blacks and whites could not go to school together. And then, of course, there was the miscegenation law. Blacks and whites could not marry. And to be, also, as the law said that whites and Mongolians could not marry. And I always say Mongolians is their word, not mine. But so, yeah, the city and the state were complicit in the segregation of the city. They were complicit in keeping black people when we couldn't go. I always like to quote Bill Clay because he talks about growing up in St. Louis in this Jim Crow era. And he talks about not being able to go to any of the movie theaters, not be able to go to any of the restaurants, not be able to go to, couldn't go to play golf. Well, you could play golf in Forest Park before 12 o'clock, and then a bell rang and you had to get off the golf course. You couldn't play in the tennis courts. Everything in this city was segregated. We know about the 1949 race riot in St. Louis, where blacks were trying to use a pool in Fairgrounds Park, and there was a riot. So, yeah, the city was complicit in segregating the city, not just the city government, but of course the private industry as well, the private sector as well. The city was complicit, of course. The city was the one that wanted to tear down Mill Creek, so, yeah, I mean, the city has, city government, state government, federal government, private industry, the private sector, they were all complicit. And you just imagine, you have the small black population, and you have all these major entities arrayed against you. The state government, the city government, the federal government, the private sector. The fact that we survived, to me, is amazing. Like I say, it shows our resilience and how we're able to accomplish and achieve so much. I think it's amazing that we've come this far, despite what we've had to put up with in this country and in this city. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
So none of the other commissioners have questions, so we want to open it up for public questions or comments. And then Reverend Anthony's going to give us directions for that. We'll pass you the mic if they ask you a question. We'll pass it to you if they have a question. I want you to stand up for the whole time. I only have one mic, so do you want me to take the mic over there?
I was just going to ask them to come here. And so, all right, so we've come to the moment where you get to engage us as well as Dr. Moore on reparations. And so here is the instructions for that. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to share with the commission. And we ask that everyone respect the 2 minutes because we want to make sure that everyone's questions are asked. We ask that as you come to the mic here, because we want to make sure everyone is heard, please state your name, neighborhood, and any organization or affiliation providing your public comment. The commission will record any questions from the public, but we will not answer questions. Again, we are collecting information and data, unless it's related to the presentation. And finally, there will be additional opportunity for the public to engage the commission with written comments, which can be submitted on our website with the city. You can go there and post your questions. When you reach your 2 minutes, I'll wave this so that you will be aware that your time has concluded. And so you may come at this time to pose your question. Come on.
We only have one mic, so you got to come to the
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Michael Gregory. Michael Gregory, I hail from Ferguson, Missouri. I currently stay in the 13th District of St. Louis City. I'm the owner of ConsciousOutlawMedia.com, Voice of Black Americans. I had a statement that I'm about to present for the... Oh, you want... Oh, no, I didn't have a question. I was just going to... Okay, so I just had a quick statement I put together discussing the importance of making sure that our reparations are lineage-based. Lineage-based reparations refer to the concept providing reparations or compensation to individuals or groups based on their ancestry or lineage. The idea behind lineage-based reparations is to acknowledge and address historical injustices and systemic inequalities that have affected Black Americans over generations. The concept of lineage-based reparations often arises in the context of addressing historical injustices such as slavery, colonization, or other forms of state-sanctioned discrimination and oppression. Black American advocates point that these historical wrongs have lasting effects on the descendants of victims, creating persistent disadvantages and disparities that continue to this day. Lineage-based reparations are seen as a means of rectifying the historical injustices, promoting social justice. The specific form of lineage-based reparations can take varies depending on the context and the proposed solutions. Some potential approaches include direct financial compensation. This involves providing monetary reparations to individuals or communities based on their lineage. The compensation can aim at addressing economic disparities, intergenerational wealth gaps, or the loss of opportunities resulting from the historical injustices. 2, land redistribution. In some cases, Black American advocates of lineage-based reparations propose the redistribution of land or other resources to address historical injustices related to dispossession or exploitation of ancestral lands. 3, systemic reforms. Lineage-based reparations can also involve addressing systemic inequalities and discriminatory practices that continue to affect Black Americans. This can include changes in policies, laws, institutional practices to ensure equal access to opportunities and resources. Thank you. Michael Gregory. I'll submit my statement to the commission.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but just a quick statement also. So, my name's Antoine. I reside in the Hamilton Heights neighborhood. No problem. And so, fellow St. Louisans, for too long the city has ignored the painful legacy of slavery and systematic racism that has plagued our city for centuries. The time has come to make amends and right the wrongs of the past and do what's right by Black citizens. That's why I stand here before you today, demanding that reparations be paid to Black Americans who trace their lineage back to the time of slavery in our country. And let me be clear, it must be cash payments first and foremost. The time for empty promises and half-hearted measures like we saw in Evanston, Illinois, has long passed. We cannot continue to delay and make excuses. And it's time for action. And that action must be in the form of direct cash payments to the descendants of those who suffered atrocities of chattel slavery, Jim Crow slavery, systematic racism, and vile oppression. We cannot erase the past, but we can take steps to heal the wounds and provide the financial repair needed for Black citizens to thrive. It is our responsibility to right the wrongs of the past and provide a pathway forward for generations to come. To those who argue against reparations, I say this: we cannot move forward as a city or even as a nation until we confront the painful truths of our past. We cannot turn a blind eye to deep-rooted inequities that still exist in our society. And we cannot ignore the fact that our Black citizens have been systematically oppressed for centuries. So, my fellow St. Louisans, I urge you to join me in demanding that reparations be paid, specifically to Black Americans who trace their lineage back to the time of slavery in the United States. And let's take this important step towards healing and justice, and let us do what's right by our fellow citizens. Thank you.
All right, hello, my name is Tichara Masimba, and I hail here from the El Fowler neighborhood. And just a quick comment, I really would like for the commission to consider challenging the notion that the conditions that we are attempting to address are a consequence of a policy. I think that if we look at the conditions of black people in St. Louis, we see identical conditions everywhere you see black people, not only in this country, but throughout the world. So I think we have to reconcile that with the notion that it is a mere policy. And I would like for us to consider that what we're looking at is a social system, and that is why the conditions are so embedded. A social system can be defined as a mode of production, which means that everything that is produced in life, food, clothing, shelter, life itself, even children, the ability to birth children, culture, et cetera, is locked into a certain definite form. And that form reproduces itself over and over in perpetuity, irrespective of the policy of a particular administration or the will of a particular person. And I think that we have to take that with us as a part of how we analyze how to remove these barriers permanently. And then lastly, I think that the other thing that we have to reckon with is that, I've been struggling for reparations for years, part of an organization that has been fighting for reparations for years. And we've got other black people in this city who've been fighting for 50 years or more for this question of reparations right in this city, and I think should be on this panel. But right now we have to recognize that just as the reparations question has been thrust into the public discussion because of resistance, the resistance you saw in Ferguson, the resistance we saw in Minnesota, and now you have the Democratic Party, for example, taking this question up, and they're gonna try to take it somewhere else. And they're gonna try to make it into some kind of welfare payment. They're even gonna produce organizations that will attempt to divide black people and say this black person shouldn't get reparations. They helped create the problem and this black person didn't. So I'm totally against this notion that we wanna start from the premise that the contradiction is with between one black group and another black group. I reject that wholeheartedly. And I think that part of what our struggle has to be is to understand that just as we thrust this question forward, there will be groups of people in power who will try to take it and then try to co-opt it and use it. So there is no singular solution that can be realized in the form of like a singular kind of payout. We have to have a permanent organization to fight to ensure that this thing looks like we want it to look every step of the way. So I hope that I'll wrap it up with this. There are two things. That one, that you can go on record supporting the creation of a permanent reparations organization. And I don't think it can be one that you create. I think it has to come from an entity outside the government. And then secondly, to really specify what it is you think needs to be done to anticipate the notion that there will be a counter struggle underway permanently as a permanent feature of whoever might be in political office at any particular time, and what we can do about that to make sure that we permanently are able to make this thing look like we want it to look. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Safia Shaban, and I'm a descendant of, my great-great-grandparents were enslaved by St. Louis University and the Jesuits. And our family has been engaged with them since 2019. And we're still pursuing. We're making a family documentary about our ancestors and all of our family. I'd like to commend Gwen Moore on her presentation. And I want to know what I'd like to know as a former social studies teacher, what things are being done to make sure that the public schools and the other schools have access to this specific, knowledge. And I think all the children should be learning their history so they won't think that their people are less than because we don't have as much, quote, material things. They should know the reasons why. And I think that would be a good insert into the public school curriculum. Okay, so we'll have to work on that. And I just wanted to let people know that there are direct descendants, proven descendants, still living, still needing reparative justice, because we're all suffering. And I agree with the previous brother that said, we can't fight amongst ourselves. Everybody in the nation and worldwide that's black has suffered due to the enslavement of our ancestors on all different levels. Asante.
Hi. Hey, Gwen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Ahmed, and also, like Safia Gwen, thank you very much for all the information you just brought to us. My first question is, how are the reparations going to be funded? Because you can't talk about reparations without talking about some means of financing, because we all know reparations are the means to try to make amends for some historical wrong that has been done. I would also like to offer these suggestions that the reparations come in more than one form of just immediate financial compensation. One, for those individuals who have declared on whatever documentation, your job application, your census form, your tax form, that you are African American, one, be the only ones who can receive reparations. Two, that they come in the form, if some people choose, direct financial compensation, however that formula will be worked out. Three, that it be offered that if some individuals would like to participate in some plan where we would receive zero interest loans for housing. If we want to go to school anywhere in the state of Missouri, that it be at zero interest, and that 75% of the educational costs be covered, all educational costs. That includes tuition, housing, books, student activity fees, and any other expenses that will fall under that. Three, that individuals who would like to start a business, excuse me, be able to get zero interest loans, as well as at least 50% of the cost in cash money to open up that business. So those are the suggestions that I have that I would definitely like you to consider, in addition to, like I said initially, if someone would like to receive just cash compensation straight out, that they be able to do it. And because so many African Americans, unfortunately, are challenged with appropriate management of money in order to build intergenerational wealth. I'm trying to think of it from the proactive sense and not intergenerational poverty, because when you say intergenerational poverty, you're talking about lack of, so you're speaking of it from a deficit perspective. But for some financial management information, resources, instruction be provided to those same individuals free of cost for as long as they need it, as well as the instruments in order to invest their money be offered to them, so they will know how to know what's available to them, how to negotiate entering that realm, and to manage their money. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Jones, and I am a member of the Academy Sherman Park Board. I am also a realtor. One thing I wanted to add to the doctor's comments is the real estate board in St. Louis issued a formal apology for their, not to give them any propers, but just to let you guys know they acknowledged. Also, when I heard about the commission and look at the plight of our neighborhoods and how we are generationally deprived from being able to maintain the buildings. We have vacancy issues. We have people holding on to property that their mother or their grandmother held on to. And I wanted to ask the commission to consider some type of generational lineage when they think about home ownership. Find out, I got a building right next door to me where one of the members is homeless and he sleeps on the porch because he can't go anywhere else. And the family let him stay there until the mother died. Mama's gonna take care of everybody. And then when mama's gone, we left out. So I would like for you guys to think of a way to incorporate some type of reparation for people who have held on to the properties for 50 years or 30 years. My property's been in my family for 75 years. And there's so many people that are on the block or in the neighborhoods that can't hold on. That's all I needed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Malik Ahmed, and I happen to be the husband of that wonderful lady there, Deborah Ahmed. I love and thank you, Dr. Moore, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you to the commission for having this informal and formal discussion on reparation. I would like the commission to consider a few things. One, to lionize some of the pioneers of the reparation movement on a political front. Ron Dellums of California and the great John Conyers of Michigan for keeping this before the public eyes from 1970 onward until especially John Conyers' death. He was courageous in staying on it and introducing it in every Congress, every session of Congress. And then also to lionize, especially the activists on the ground, the organizations. I know Sophia would know all of the organizations, but NBUF is one of the organizations that was very much a part of just making this available. But the commission, I would ask y'all to get all of the names of the community activists and social organizations that made this front and center of their whole appeal when it was unpopular. And that also includes Trans-Africa, Randall Robinson, that made this front and center. Randall Robinson produced a book called The Debt that actually went into what the financial compensation ought to look like. And so it'll be good for the commission to get those studies so that we know the dollar figure. We have an approximation of the dollar figure. Also, I would like the commission to include two areas in the reparation package. Deborah articulated a lot of the educational, and we heard about the housing side of it, but I would also include the medical side, that reparations should be given to black folks on the medical side. That is, that all of our operations should be free of charge, all of them. My wife just had her eye worked on a few days ago, and the bill was something like $17,000 for a little outpatient surgery. I know of people that have had cancer surgery, and the bill $500,000 to $1 million. So we want that in the package. Black folks, as Dr. Ross knows, suffer from all kinds of acute medical conditions, and we don't have, many of us don't have the money nor the insurance to pay for those medical conditions. On the other hand, I think that we should also include amnesty for prisoners. The prison industrial complex industry is one that goes back before the days of slavery. I know that when we discuss reparation, we also discuss how they criminalize black folks right after emancipation to keep the system of the plantation concentration camps in business. And the states and the cities participated in that. So a criminal empire was built around the criminal justice system that so many innocent black people have been swept up in it. The penalties related to some of those incarceration is such that they can't get out of prison because they have not paid the bill associated with being illegally confined in the first place. So I would love for the commission to make sure that the criminal justice system, amnesty, as well as financial compensation is given to hundreds of thousands of African Americans who have suffered unjustly in this system. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Martin, and I am from Kingsway West neighborhood. I want to follow up the last three speakers, and I'm sorry I ran late. I had to leave another meeting to get here, so I'm sorry, Dr. Moore, I didn't hear all that you presented. But I was a resident of Mill Creek Valley neighborhood. And right now, I work with a team of people. Our committee is called the Mill Creek Valley Commemoration Committee. And we've been together for over 2 years, doing a lot of mighty, powerful work. And that committee also includes Dr. Moore, also Dr. Malika Horn, who is Dr. Moore's sister, Vivian Gibson, the book author, The Last Children in Mill Creek. And so the work that we're doing is with Great River Greenway to memorialize Mill Creek Valley neighborhood. So if you drive down Market Street, you'll see a tremendous monument. I also want to say to the commission, Mill Creek Valley neighborhood was special to me, but also we cannot forget Pruitt-Igoe housing projects. which is where a lot of people who left the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood had to reside. There was some spraying of chemicals in that housing project, and a lot of people got really ill. So as we look at our Mill Creek Valley neighborhood story, we cannot forget Pruitt-Igoe housing projects. So I'd just like for you to consider when thinking reparation, we cannot forget that part of our story. Thank you.
Are there others before we move forward?
My name is Sherman George, and I wasn't going to say anything today, but I really had to try to take everything in and try to understand, because I haven't been keeping up with the reparations, although I know there's a need for reparations. I did want to make a statement, but I wanted to ask a question, but it was hard for me to ask a question because of what Deborah Ahmed said. The amount of money or reparation that we're going to receive would have a lot to do with what we do and how we do it. And so, but I would say, I brought this paper up this morning. This paper, I just saw in the news today, evictions and how they increased 50%. One of the things we have to do, whatever we do, has to be sustainable. It can't be a one in and one and out. It can't be that way. And I suggest that it should be a trust fund. A trust fund that we can see that it's going to extend far beyond today, tomorrow, but far into the future. Of course, the real thing that would have to happen is that I see, when you talk about the cash payment, the young man there said something that I don't think cash payments to everybody is going to is going to give us any long-lasting gratification. It's instant gratification. Although it was certainly set forth a feeling that we're sincere about what we want to do. But we need housing, education, and decent jobs. And it needs to be supplemented or to help people stay, for instance, stay in their homes, and apartments. Just because I have a home don't mean I can keep it. And I'm saying that the trust fund ought to be built on something that says we're going to make sure that this home stays with you and your family. My mother had a home, and she passed away over 15 years ago, but the home is still in the family. It's for anyone who needs to stay there. So I understand that part of it. And a lot of things where we're hurt at, even, I was at the fire department for many years, but I understood the difference in the lack of hiring and the lack of promotions, where you could see the difference. You could just figure out the difference in salaries, how many people you have that are black and how many white are working there. It's real plain to see. Just add the numbers up. So my question is, I do have one question. Given the amount of money or reparations, how do we hope to achieve our goal? I know you're asking questions now. You don't have all the answers, but I always brought with the premise of what do we hope to achieve, and how do we plan on doing it? And I know a lot of statements and questions are important, but let's get to that bottom line. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to all the folks who spoke today. If you have comments that you need to submit, you can submit them directly to Vernon Mitchell, who has cards available for you, whether you spoke today or not. If you have other additional thoughts, we are collecting those as they come in, so please be sure to submit any comments or questions that you have to the commission. We are going to just very quickly review our summer schedule, so we're trying very hard to make sure you know when the next meeting is as far as advanced as possible. So we're going to bring up William for that, and then we'll start with closing remarks from the commission, and we'll get us out of here. William?
Hello, everyone. Feel free to jot these down or add these to your calendar. As we mentioned in our previous meeting, we want to diversify locations and days to accommodate everyone and make it accessible to as many people as possible. So for our July meeting, it will be on Wednesday, July 26th at New North Side. And for those at home, the address is 5939 Goodfellow Boulevard. So Wednesday, July 26th from 6 to 8. And our date for August will be Saturday, August 26th. The location for that is, it will be determined at our next meeting, and we will make sure to communicate that to you all. Anybody need me to repeat that, or are you all good? Okay. So July meeting will be Wednesday, July 26th at New North Side Family Life Center from 6 to 8. And then August meeting will be August 26th, which is a Saturday. What? At noon, sorry. Everybody good? What was it? The August one will be determined at July's meeting. Okay.
So July's meeting will be here in this room, July 26th, 6 p.m. That's a Wednesday. Saturday, August 26th. We're still fielding locations, but we are headed south for those two meetings. So we had two sort of central at Harris Stowe, two north at New North Side, and then we'll have two south figuring out that location. So if you know anybody, let us know. Okay, so we're going to end with final remarks from the commission. Ms. Moore, I'll start with, Ms. Gwen, I'll start with you.
I don't have much to say. I really appreciate everybody being here, the thoughtful questions, comments, and let me say that we're taking this all in. We're gathering as much information as we can. We want to hear what the public thinks. We have our own views, but the public views are the views that are important. So it's really critical that we hear from you, and we really appreciate you coming here on a Saturday afternoon, which most people are out running errands, so we know you are really committed to this process, and so thank you.
I simply want to echo Dr. Moore's comments. Thank you for coming out today, and if you know of other people who are doing this work, been involved with this work, I heard someone mention that there are other groups who are participating in this sort of work, and so invite all of them out, have them to be present, because as much information as we can gather is helpful in this process.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I didn't introduce my role here. I'm vice chair of the Reparations Commission. I want to highlight the comments that Mr. Ahmed made, Malik Ahmed made about our really memorializing the people who came before us, before this commission. We've heard that over the past 3 sessions. A lot of the work has been done. A lot of the comments have been made. And our goal is not to recreate anything. Our goal is to hear from the public, from you, but truly to highlight, use the word lionize, those who came before us. That is indeed our goal, to take that path that was blazoned to really saturate it with real-world comments and experiences from you, the audience, and really synthesize a report that will reflect all of the experiences, both past and present. So thank you all so much.
I just wanted to thank everybody who came out today. I really do appreciate your comments. I heard some people mention about the activists that you guys want us to do some research on. I also ask that you guys help us help you if you guys know anybody that, any experts or anybody on the ground level that we need to be looking at, who has already been bringing forth these type of conversations. Please inform us of those. And I also want to ensure you that God already has victory over this situation and that he's the higher power, you know. He has authority and we will receive justice. Amen. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Will Foster. I just want to first thank you all for coming out and engaging and participating in this process. Also, I want to thank Dr. Gwen for her presentation, educating us all. I heard a lot of things that I was not aware of, and I will definitely consider those in our internal discussions going forward. But that's all.
Yeah, just want to say thank you to the commissioners for making this event possible. And thank you again to Ms. Gwen Moore for that powerful presentation that shows how long this conversation or these policies, these procedures, this culture, right, as you mentioned, has permeated inside of our society across the globe, creating realities that we know where our children, our future generations don't have the same access to opportunities and resources and wealth building as counterparts. And so thank you for that, Ms. Gwen. And just to recap, you know, we take vivid notes and we have it recorded, and so we're going to go back and transcribe some of these. And what I really want to just appreciate are the recommendations, because it is important that we hear directly around ideas as they relate to education, as they relate to housing, as they relate to compensation, as they relate to economic justice, and the questions around what's our ultimate goal, how are we going to do this. And I sincerely agree that I think this report leaves an entire section that lionizes the pioneers of reparations, both as in the national context and also those locally who have been fighting for this for generations. And we sincerely thank you for paving a pathway to this moment and are in constant gratitude of the work that our elders have done and continue to do on our behalf, so that people like myself can even stand here and be a part of this conversation. So thank you for that. Again, our next meeting is July 26th at 6 p.m. in this room. We hope to see you there. If you spoke today, I would like to introduce you to Mahela. We are an organizing entity as a Reparations Commission, and so Action has dedicated staff to make sure that we are working between meetings. And so if you spoke today, Mahela is going to walk up to you and ask you for contact information, because this process of lionizing our pioneers, I feel like there's consensus that we're going to do that. So we want to make sure we get all the correct information. And we may have some follow-up questions for you if you testify today. So thank you all so much for coming to be with us. Thank you to Mayor Jones for establishing this commission. Thank you again to Ms. Moore for presenting. And we will see you next month, and we hope you all have a safe and joyous weekend. Thank you. Yes, okay. Yeah, so this meeting is recorded, and all of our meetings are recorded, both our internal meetings and public meetings. You can find them on the Cities of St. Louis's YouTube page. So they're streaming live right now, and then they'll be there after the meeting as well if you need to go back. Thank you to STL TV as well for always being here, making sure that this gets communicated to a broader audience.